Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Tomeno, and I am with Professional Patient Advocacy in Life Sciences, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the latest installment of PPALS Presents, our webinar series. Today's topic is Shaping the Patient Advocacy Role Through Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. It is part one of a two-part webinar, Diversity and Talent of Patient Advocacy. Part two will be taking place in late January at an undetermined date. Today's presentation will be approximately 45 minutes long. We may hold a 15-minute or so question and answer at the end, but that'll be time permitting. If you have any questions, please submit them through the question and answer feature online, and we will address as many as we're able to. After the webinar, an email will be sent out to all who have registered, and it will contain a link with a copy to the recording of today's webinars. I'd like to introduce our moderator for the event. That is Veronica Moore. She is the Senior Manager of Patient Advocacy at Horizon Therapeutics, and she will introduce your panelists. Veronica.
Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar today. It is with esteemed pleasure and honor to introduce panelists and dear colleagues in the advocacy space today. First, we have Paul Lim, who is currently Associate Director of Patient Advocacy at Blueprint Medicines, leading the company's global patient advocacy activities in rare and hematologic disorders. Prior to joining Blueprint, Paul was a consultant at Boz Advisors, a global patient advocacy and engagement advocacy firm. Throughout his career, Paul has provided strategic consultation for over 30 pharmaceutical and biotech companies with focus on oncology and rare diseases advocacy relations across drug development and commercialization continuum. Paul received his Master of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Stanford University. He graduated from Cornell University magna cum laude with a BA in chemistry and chemical biology and a BA in economics. Second, it is with honor to introduce our colleague, my dear colleague, Daniel Martinez here at Horizon Therapeutics. He's a manager of patient advocacy for the gout business unit at Horizon Therapeutics. Prior to joining Horizon, Daniel spent more than 10 years in the nonprofit field in executive roles within healthcare industries. Daniel was the first person in his family born in the United States. Daniel attended Metropolitan State College of Denver, where he majored in history and minored in political science. After graduating college and a brief stint in education, Daniel became interested in advocacy. His life was impacted greatly by the goodwill of others, so it will be only fitting that he explore a career in community service and patient impact. And last but not least, Michelle Rhee, who is Vice President of Patient Affairs and Advocacy at X4 Pharmaceuticals. She has more than a decade of experience leading patient affairs, advocacy across pharmaceutical and nonprofit industries. Michelle is embedded in the rare disease and oncology patient communities through her extensive professional work and professional experience in cancer diagnosis, with a cancer diagnosis at the age of 20, and a rare disease diagnosis at the age of 21. Partnering with these communities, she has led patient interviews, advisory boards, and represented patient perspective, which has directly informed trial design, patient support services, and disease education programs, among other efforts. In addition, Michelle has served as chair of the Mass Bio Patient Advocacy Roundtable since 2017, and is a founding board member for Cost of Care, an organization dedicated to helping clinicians and healthcare systems deliver better care at a lower cost. And she's also a member of the Massachusetts Rare Disease Advisory Council. Michelle received her MPH, Master's in Public Health, from Yale School of Public Health, and her MBA from Yale School of Management. Thank you all for joining us today. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with colleagues in the advocacy space. First, I will kick it off with a few questions, and I will do like a round robin and have a really honest and candid discussion around this topic. Today, we want to discuss diversity in talent as it relates to patient advocacy. Over the years, and even more now over the past 12 months, we've seen a lot of our industry colleagues really talk about the topic of diverse talent and hire. But for this actual platform, we want to talk about diversity and talent as it pertains to patient advocacy. And we understand that diverse career backgrounds are just as important as racial and gender diversity in the patient advocacy professional realm. Michelle, can you share how your educational or personal experience has shaped or formed the path to patient advocacy for you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Veronica. I think that that personal experience of being a patient has led a lot of people into the patient advocacy realm. And I have so much admiration for people who actually don't have that and still have the passion and commitment that drives them every day. But for me, I also really wanted to have that firm education and commercial background to really understand how companies were making their decisions. So that was why I went back to school, studied, got my MBA and MPH, and I was really fortunate to even have the ability to do that. A lot of patients are not able to do that because of medical bills, because of health status. And so just being able to do that, to study, and then to be able to, right after grad school, work at a consulting company that specialized in life sciences, new product commercialization, and market research. So being able to combine my trial design and biostatistics study in grad school, along with understanding pipeline prioritization from the commercial side, I think really set me up very nicely to work within patient advocacy and to engage on the company side.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to turn it over to Daniel. You have a really unique path to your journey and a very unique personal story on how advocacy in your path, how your educational and personal story has informed your path to advocacy. Do you mind sharing with the team today?
Yeah, sure. So I have over, like you mentioned, I have over a decade experience in nonprofit positions, but really my journey began as young as 9 years old. I came from a single parent background, did not have a father figure in my life, and so my mother introduced me to an organization called Big Brothers Big Sisters, and so at that time I was matched at 9 years old with a big brother mentor who is still a mentor in my life. And so growing up, when I began to explore career opportunities, it became natural for me to explore those opportunities within advocacy. And actually my first nonprofit position was with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Colorado, and then began to transition to other health industry organizations like Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and then most recently Arthritis Foundation. So those career paths really led me to the position I'm currently in with Horizon, being in patient advocacy, and it's really helped me continue to explore, I would say, more opportunities to serve the community that I'm in, but also serve those communities that are in need of support, similar to what I was in growing up. So I would also say too, it's really helped me in my personal life as well, and how myself and my family engage in the community. We have been foster parents for more than a few years, and recently adopted a daughter through the foster system, and actually she is an African American, and so it's very important for us to be able to provide an environment, an atmosphere where she is also not being looked at as I would say, as different. So we're very adamant to being a part of a community, a neighborhood where she could be exposed to people who look like her, and really she can really embrace her culture to the fullest ability. So I'm very excited to be a part of this panel, to be able to share my personal experiences, but also be able to share how we can make an impact in this community.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And Paul, you have a really different experience of advocacy and path compared to all of us. I would love for you to share light on how your personal or professional journey has landed you to the point that you are in your professional advocacy space now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Veronica. Yeah, I don't have amazing stories like Michelle or Daniel. So I was studying on the West Coast, studying to be an engineer, and then now I guess now my wife was on the East Coast, and I had a reason to move, so I made the move, and turned out there were no job prospects in water purification engineering. That's what I was studying in grad school. So I was job searching, and then my friend at the time who was working at VAS said, "Hey, are you interested in consulting?" And I said, "What is it?" "It's patient advocacy." And I had no idea what patient advocacy is at the time, but basically how she described it to me was, you solve problems to help patients and their families, and that was it. So I said, I like problem solving, I like helping people, so why not? So I joined VAS Advisors then, and over the course of 7 years I spent there, I got to meet with amazing people, lots of very passionate patients, inspiring patient advocates, and professionals like Michelle and Veronica. I met you while I was at VAS many years ago, and yeah, I mean, ever since then I've kind of learned what patient advocacy is, lived and breathed it, and been inspired by it, and became really passionate about helping the patients in need, and kind of helping the companies by like representing patient voice. And one good thing about working at an agency is you get to work with so many different companies and so many different therapeutic areas. So it was a great experience for me to see different communities and how different companies are approaching it. Best practices, good practices, some bad practices where we learn from. But overall, it has led me to an opportunity at Blueprint Medicines to champion patient voice and help the company to be more patient-centric.
Thank you. I think that's very gleaming. Reflecting back on, Michelle and I have experience working at a clinical research site, being project managers, but then also I've worked at a CRO. So I've seen the lay of the land of advocacy, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the brilliant, how it's been diversified in that way. And just to hear the panels, your journey, their bios of your educational background, and then how you landed into industry advocacy really talks about the diverse skill sets, the experience and expertise that we all bring. And this is definitely an opportunity for leaders in advocacy to think about diverse paths, career paths, to find very diverse, niche, and meaningful talent that is in the community globally. So really excited about that. I want to go back to Michelle really quick, because we both have public health backgrounds and work in social science. And do you mind sharing around how those skill sets or those talents really play up to the patient advocacy space? I think historically, a lot of people in advocacy work in comms and marketing, but can you just touch on really quick around your perspective on the public health champions that we are and how we add value to patient advocacy?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge proponent for public health. Actually, I think now with the way the world is, everyone is a huge proponent of public health. But one of the ways that I think about it, and that I help explain it to my colleagues as well, is that if you have patient services in your company, or like patient support services, patient like case managers work with a patient family one-on-one, or a patient one-on-one. Patient advocacy works with a population or a community of patients. And similarly, when I used to describe like a public health official, a doctor works with a patient or a family one-on-one, whereas a public health official works at and looks at the health of a community. And so when I look at patient advocacy, that's what we're doing. We're trying to look at the health and the needs of the community, as well as sort of like the one-on-one needs, because that helps inform what the needs are of the community. But public health really lends itself to a patient advocacy, because those same skill sets of really taking the temperature of a community, of a population, trying to understand not only what their needs are, but also what their motivations are, how you can enact change, how you can change what their actions are, but also how are they getting information, what's their news flow, who do they trust, who do they not trust, everything like that, and what would the unintended consequences be. Those are all of the things that you learn in public health and that are directly related to the work that you do in patient advocacy.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Now switching gears here, historically, the patient advocacy role and even leadership roles have been held by non-minority and females historically in the patient advocacy space. I'm going to call on our two men of the panel, Paul and Daniel. Can you really share a lens around, speak to your experience of navigating the patient advocacy space throughout your professional career as a male and likely a minority in this field? And if you have any words for the audience today around the value of having male talent in the patient advocacy role. I'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, I don't think it was a big surprise when I went into the nonprofit field that I would primarily be surrounded by women. So it was not a shock to me. I will say that a majority of, not all of my supervisors were Caucasian women. And I applaud them for every single one of them for allowing me, a male, to be included onto their team. Because I do understand too, I will preface it that by saying this, that I know a majority of the men in leadership positions within advocacy organizations are primarily male. They are primarily white males as well. But on the middle level, the middle management, a majority of them were women. So to be honest, it was a little bit difficult for me to, more difficult for me to identify that mentor within that field space that might be able to kind of guide me professionally into an area where I wanted to grow. It was a little bit more challenging on my end. However, I do empathize and I do sympathize that women have been dealing with that in the corporate space for generations as well. But for me, what made it a little bit more difficult for me to grow professionally, I always had to find a new nonprofit to be a part of, unfortunately, because those relationships were being built amongst those women just naturally within that space. And so for me to explore higher level opportunities, I always had to go to another advocacy organization to find that. And again, I do applaud those individuals who were able to bring me over and welcome me into those new positions. So it was a little bit more difficult for me to kind of integrate into that field. Also being a minority, it was very rare for minorities to be in my spaces. You know, where you will see minorities in nonprofit organizations are usually minority served advocacy organizations, right? But the organizations I were part of were not primarily focused on specific demographics and communities. And so it was kind of just, I was always someone that was maybe looked a little different in those communities, but didn't mean that I didn't represent certain populations within those health spaces as well. So just a little bit of my experience in that.
Great, thank you so much for gleaming light. I'll pass it over to Paul.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Daniel, because I think I had a slightly different experience where I think I personally have benefited by being like a male employee, at least in the agency side. And I do agree with you, Daniel, that a lot of the so-called the leaders of patient advocacy function tend to be white, Caucasian male employees. with a lot of middle management. At least that's what I've seen in 30 plus companies that I work with. Of course, except for Michelle, who's an amazing individual who I respect a lot. I think because I'm a male in very female woman dominant field. I think I was definitely listened to a little bit more. I felt like I was maybe able to connect with the functional leads who often were male, perhaps, and building relationships with advocates. Maybe it's the lower voice tone that maybe travels better through the speaker phones. But all in all, I actually thought it's been kind of beneficial for me in navigating the advocacy profession overall in both, not only from like the industry and like working with colleague side, but also from building relationships with advocates. I would say that there are definitely some cultural or personality adjustments that I've had to make over the years, but I didn't consider them as big barriers for me, because maybe just the nature of working in an agency, it's just all about kind of changing up your style to make sure your client's happy. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. That's really interesting to see the similarities and differences in experience between you and Daniel, both male working in the advocacy space over the course of your career. Michelle, I really want to glean in on you from your professional experience, because you are a vice president, you are a woman in the advocacy space in this role. Can you just glean around your perspective historically, how this role has been shaped in your experience, and anything that you want to share out in that way?
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating to me how much this field has changed, first of all, and how much it's grown. And so when I look at like 20 years ago, when I first sort of joined the patient community as a patient myself, I didn't know that patient advocacy was an option as a career. And when you sort of look historically, even on the nonprofit side, 20 years ago, there weren't necessarily, like, it wasn't necessarily thought of as like a career. And when I look at like my career progression, and when I look at patient advocacy in general and career progression opportunities, it's changed over time about whether or not there was even an executive level patient advocacy option, and whether it goes up to the chief patient advocate as an option at a company. And so it's one of those things where it's sort of over time, as people have been in the patient advocacy position at a company, that they've been progressing in their career. And as they've progressed and been promoted, those positions seem to have been opened because they've progressed in their career. I don't know if I explained that very succinctly or clearly, but hopefully I did. And because the majority of people who were in patient advocacy and industry, when they were brought in, they were brought over from the nonprofit sector. They were primarily Caucasian women. And so as they were promoted into higher positions, they were also Caucasian women because they had the experience. And so there's that sort of issue that you face where you want to hire people who have experience. The people who have experience at that higher level are the ones who had experience years ago, who were brought over from the nonprofit side. And so it's that similar funnel effect that you see in other industries where, like, because there were these issues years ago of a lack of diversity, you're seeing the lack of diversity now, both at like the middle management as well as the higher management level. And especially at the executive management level, what I see is there just aren't people who've had 20 years of patient advocacy experience in industry, because that doesn't exist. But like there are a few examples, but in general that doesn't exist, and there really aren't like minorities who've had that experience. So what I've seen is that they'll pull people over from other functional areas instead, and I don't know if that's a different debate about whether that's a good idea or not. But that's sort of what I've seen in my career. And I have to say, I'm incredibly fortunate, I think, in my career progression. And I think it is the combination of my background, like personal experience, being a study coordinator, working in nonprofit, having graduate degrees, working in commercialization. Like I put all of that together because I knew I wanted this as a career. And I was just fortunate enough that I had the advantages and the time and the help to do it. Otherwise, I would not be where I am right now.
Absolutely. I want to touch on filling that funnel from a diverse lens. And I want to ask all the panelists, do you have one thing or your thoughts on diversifying talent in the advocacy role? And if you have any experience on what your organization is doing or personal, your ideas on how we can diversify our talent pool in advocacy now and in the future, because that's really important. Filling that funnel from a diverse perspective. I'll start with you, Daniel, around, you have any thoughts or idea as far as how do we diversify that pool of individuals and talent within advocacy space?
Yeah, I think it's going to take some extra effort. It's going to take us having to reach out to certain communities that we want to represent. I think each and every single one of us attendees and on the panel, we can all relate that the products that we have out there are not specifically for one racial background, right? So it's going to require us to think outside the box, maybe outreach to those certain communities, whether it's through chambers of commerce or to identify talent in those areas, maybe looking at diverse colleges and universities and looking at their skill sets and trying to lure them into this area and letting them know we really are trying to represent the communities that we serve. Is going to be imperative for us to diversify our talent. So it's going to take some extra effort. And to be honest, I think there might be some hesitation from these communities. I think historically, pharma has not been viewed as an industry that serves those communities. I think historically we can look at some examples on that, which can be a whole nother topic. So we're going to have to earn that trust. We're going to have to go the extra mile to lure them in.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Daniel. And just to piggyback on that, as an African-American female working in pharma, in drug development, I've had to have really direct conversations around people in the community to ask, what do you do for a living for advocacy? And what does that mean? Advocacy is not pushing meds. I'm not out for a sale. I'm here for the patient voice. And I think those candid conversations are really important when you're trying to expose people to this field of work, especially from an industry perspective. Paul, do you have any thoughts on the value or things that we can do to diversify talent in the advocacy space?
Yeah, so I'm gonna echo both Michelle and Daniel's point. I think it's tough. I mean, talking about the funnel effect, there's a bit of in terms of diversifying talent in patient advocacy, there's this chicken and egg kind of which one comes first argument, because the advocacy community in many disease areas, disease communities, the participants in that advocacy community are primarily Caucasian females. And we also have that in our profession as advocacy professionals. So I think it's going to take some time to not only elevate the diversity or encourage diversity in the advocacy community by reaching out to like minority population, and also doing it from advocacy professional, like from industry side. But the reason why I say chicken or egg thing issue is because not a lot of advocacy talent comes from that advocacy community and the ones who are participating in advocacy conversations. But then by having more diverse talent in advocacy from industry side, I think there are more opportunities to encourage diversity in terms of whether it's educational programming, whether it's encouraging patient advocacy groups to be more intentional about reaching minorities. But then the challenge is this whole other conversation is are companies ready to make that investment in the long term? Because it's so easy to just go for the, oh yeah, they're already engaged, they're already informed patients, let's just go to them. And it's also challenging from patient advocacy group side, where a lot of them are very small. Many of them don't even have full-time paid staff. So with all these volunteers already having a hard time meeting the needs of the patient just by answering phone calls and emails, can we really ask them to do more? I think it's very challenging. But in terms of value of talent, I think that's one aspect, by encouraging more diversity and just being mindful. So like Daniel, so I'm an immigrant. I wasn't even US citizen until 10 years ago, or not even 10 years ago. And just by being a minority immigrant, I'm always like mindful of that there are people out there, whatever we're doing in terms of programming, there's always someone like my parents or myself who needs help and who may not have access to get help. They might not even know where to get help. So I think just that alone, just always being mindful and kind of like living and breathing that thought process and that life, I think it adds value and also helps the team be more culturally sensitive, as well as more thoughtful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate that answer. Michelle, do you have anything to add to what Daniel and Paul have stated?
Yeah, I think two things. One, to add on to what Paul was saying in terms of sort of thinking of your audience and intentionality, especially in the rare disease space. I think we're really good, or hopefully we're really good at going to where the patients are and really having that mindset of patients first. And I think we can apply a lot of what we do there with minority candidates for these positions. Like if you want to look at opportunities to hire minority candidates, like think about, where are they? And then go to them, in the same way that if you're looking to recruit someone with a rare disease, like where are they? Go to them and then open the trial site, sort of similar here. And then I think it also goes back to that first question where we're asking about like, what are the skill sets? Where are you recruiting from? Being creative and thoughtful about what the actual skill set is that you're looking for, rather than just hiring someone from a patient advocacy group who has that like patient advocacy experience, because that isn't necessarily the background that you want. If you want someone who can manage grants and sponsorships, that isn't necessarily the person you want if you're looking at like the development part of your company. So I think like that definitely is one side of it. The other one is that in terms of hiring, a lot of hiring happens, I think everyone knows this, word of mouth networking. And so like expand your network, just network with everyone, and not just with, it sounds bad, but like not just with Caucasians and women, but like expand your network. I think everyone knows this. I know I'm opening myself up to this, but I will network with anyone. If someone tells me that they have an interest in patient advocacy, I will talk with anyone, because I think that it's really important to network. I will try to introduce you to other people who I think that you might have a connection with, a commonality with in the patient advocacy space as well, because it's really important that if you don't have as strong a background, that you start building a network, because that's how you'll be able to find a potential job opening.
And can I say something real quick, Veronica? I feel, and Michelle and Paul, I don't know if you guys have experienced this as well with your companies, but I feel once an advocacy position is opening, you're getting dozens and dozens, if not close to hundreds of applicants, right? And so sometimes we might have that mindset of, oh, we have a pool of people already to choose from. And we might have to dive deeper in order to find the right candidate to be a part of our company. So just having that, keeping that in mind when we do have vacant positions, because advocacy is the word is getting out there right now that it is a great position, it is a great field to be a part of. And so now having to bring in more diverse talent is even more important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Daniel, that, we may have the perfect candidate in mind for a role within our organizations, but I challenge everyone to take an intentional pause and see if there's a way to diversify your team. Just to be very transparent, I'm the only African-American person on my team at Horizon, but Daniel came months after me in that way, and it's really shifted and allowed for us to challenge the way that we do patient advocacy, to really challenge very thoughtful and inclusive conversations around the work that we're doing, the important work that we're doing in rare, rheumatic, and severe inflammatory. So as you're thinking about candidate selections, thinking about the way that it will add value, not only to your team, but to your organization and the important work that you're doing on the behalf of the patients in that
Actually,
way.
If I could, I wanted to add to that. So if you are in the position to do it, to have a conversation with talent acquisition before you've posted the position, before you're even close to posting a position, to see what your options are. Because if it's approved and I have an open headcount that's coming up, I've already had the conversation with talent acquisition about where are we posting this, what are the opportunities that we have in terms of like reaching a more diverse audience, things like that, because of exactly what we're talking about here. And you have to be intentional, you have to be thoughtful, you have to think ahead, because you'll get flooded with applications. And you don't want to just go with the typical like process, like the easy weeding out. You want to think about the ways that a really diverse team can add value. And I think the important thing is to think about it as being additive. Like this is adding to the growth and the value of your team.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, yeah, Michelle, it's a good point, but I think it's a very, in a different angle from company perspective, especially smaller companies with very few, maybe one if not two advocacy positions. Whenever there are job postings on patient advocacy, they're looking for people with 10 to 15 years of disease experience in that specific disease, and they want to have some level of patient advocacy and industry and or nonprofit experience. So a lot of these job descriptions are very targeted towards people who, as you talked about earlier, people who have history of working in the nonprofit and the advocacy community, and a lot of them by default, because the participants in advocacy community are a lot of white female Americans. It's so tough, and I haven't had to have this conversation, but you would need to almost convince the talent acquisition team or your HR team that this is not a risk, but it can be a big plus for our team. But I don't know how many companies are willing to have that conversation, especially when their team's very small.
Yeah, that is where I would say I have been fortunate in that I was able to write. I can write the job descriptions for my team, and people can't really say anything. I think I didn't even include that someone needed to have like a BA, like a college degree, because I don't think that that's necessary. But yeah, most companies have what I consider to be ridiculous requirements for this position. You do not need a PhD. You do not need a medical degree. Like there are things that are just not necessary. And I can also tell you that people who've had years of experience in industry still don't know GCP. They still don't know all of like some very important like things that they need to know. I would have had to train them anyway, so I might as well get someone who doesn't have industry experience, but who has strengths in other areas. So yeah, and that's the sort of the root of why I personally also don't think that those are necessary.
Yeah, and one other way to approach it would be to, if companies are, and this is what we're doing at Blueprint, if there are no immediate headcounts available, at least something we can, as a company can do is open up internship positions or fellowship positions and offer it to, the minority students who haven't had the same level of opportunity, and open up a position and see how it goes and help them grow. And, if they, perform well, great, and they get some exposure and experience. That's yet another future advocacy professional. So making some investment, less risky investment might be a good investment.
Yeah, I would agree with the apprenticeship and internship opportunities, and to really reach out to historically Black colleges and universities that have public health programs, and even other social science backgrounds and really skill sets in that way to
And
create an
actually,
early career development funnel as well.
I think Life Science Cares, I think, has an internship program, and they also will do a round table, like a breakfast round table, where you talk about different careers. And I did talk about patient advocacy. I did educate about patient advocacy. But if your company engages with Life Science Cares at all, you might want to look into whether or not they can help you with a patient advocacy internship.
Absolutely. Okay, I have another question. Of course, I'm full of questions. I am really big around, and all of us on the panel are really big about holding people accountable in the work that we do. Any thoughts on holding your teams or your organization accountable for this really important work of holding teams accountable for diverse talent and advocacy and patient engagement work? I'll start with Michelle. I'll start with you first.
Actually, in the conversation with talent acquisition around like this potential opening, we were talking about exactly that, because for this functional area, you're not looking at, are you hiring enough women? Like, that's not the question. It's really being thoughtful about each functional area and what do you mean by, like, what is it that you're trying to measure? And so as we're looking into 2022, being very thoughtful and intentional so that we can identify what it is that we want to measure, and then exactly as you said, holding ourselves accountable to it. That's on the talent side. There's a whole other side in terms of clinical trial recruitment and everything else, which was not the topic here, but I think patient advocacy is a really great example of where it's not cookie cutter. It's not a cookie cutter approach of saying that you need like an equal number of this and that or anything like that. That doesn't make sense. And you really need to be thoughtful about how you approach it.
Daniel, any thoughts on holding colleagues or teams accountable for diverse talent and advocacy?
Yeah, I would say, really encouraging proper training and exposure to DE&I, so that way the conversation is had and people can be more aware of the importance of diverse talent, especially in industry and on our teams. I will also say to, really encouraging managers to have open conversations and feeling, and if it's a bigger team, maybe even offering the opportunity to have anonymous feedback surveys on diversity and what they're looking for and what they would like to see on their team could be very important. Going back to the proper training, I will say that this morning, our team, we have a fairly large advocacy team, and we had a great discussion today with regards to dimensions of diversity. And so we were able to really each identify, what are our cognitive strengths and our physical, relational, occupational, societal values. And it really opened the door for our colleagues to have that aha moment amongst, each one of us and our differences and how important it is to be different and to celebrate that. Because how boring would this conversation be if we were all the same? And so being able to really emphasize on differences and how important it is in our position, in our job, to identify with the community that we're all trying to serve. So I think just having that training is important continuously too, not just that first quarter and then go about your work. How can we implement it once per quarter?
Yeah, I think that's great, Daniel. And one thing that we do at Horizon is we do like getting to know you, getting to know who you are as an employee. I would challenge everyone on the call, if you're a leader or a contributor in the advocacy, get to know your employee, get to know their perspective on what they're bringing as it pertains to strategy and execution, because we all bring a diverse perspective and it may glean light on gaps or needs within your team from a diverse lens as well. Paul, do you have anything to add?
Not a lot. I think Michelle and Daniel covered it. I think, in terms of diversity, one other point that I want to make is it's important to find team members that kind of add to and work, have skills that are kind of additive or have like a synergistic effect. Not everybody's, perfect advocacy professional. Some might be more warm, some might be more process oriented. And it's important to find like that right mixture. If everyone on patient advocacy team are big dreamers with big vision, but not necessarily very, say detail oriented or process oriented, maybe you'll have a hard time reaching the vision. But if you have a good mix of talent who, have certain experience and the others and have a good, what's the word I'm looking for? That work well, gel well, and kind of complement each other, I think that's important to do. But in terms of holding accountable, companies and patient advocacy teams accountable, it's so tough because, again, patient advocacy community and the participants in advocacy, patient advocacy, are primarily, like Caucasian, female population. So I think our teams should also be doing not only, in terms of the immediate talent needs, but also be considering how do we encourage the minority population to participate more in the advocacy community. Because I think that down the 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that's how we'll get more diverse pool of talent in patient advocacy.
Absolutely. Michelle, do you want to comment on company culture?
Yes, thank you. It was actually something Daniel said reminded me also. We've been, as we're looking at 2022, as we're looking at talent acquisition, but company culture as well, we've been, of course, we have task forces, we have subcommittees, and all of that. And one of the things that we also want to be really intentional about is even after you've hired someone, making sure that they stay and making sure that they're comfortable in the company culture. And in biotech, in this industry, in any industry, in any company, there can be, not just in patient advocacy, but within the entire company, a culture that's not necessarily welcoming for minorities. So making sure that we also do training around that within the company, and that we're like, even things like company activities. I won't say like what company, I won't say what happened, but like the outing, the activity was archery. And I just have to say, like, I don't think that like my Korean family would not necessarily that like live through the Korean War is not going to be like, yeah, archery seems like a great pastime and activity. Like that's not, I feel like that's not really necessarily inclusive of everyone. That would be like asking my family to go like, it's not really something that I think was done with all populations in mind. And so being thoughtful about some of those things and really thinking through the entire company culture beyond just the patient advocacy function as well, we're looking into that. And I think it's and part of the reason that it's sort of within my space as well is that patient advocacy, it's in the word advocacy, and we're looking at the intersectionality of how language, how culture, how what you say and how you say it impacts what you think and how you think. And so you have, I think, a really nice opportunity to impact that and work with that.
Absolutely. I think we have a question from the audience. I would love to get everyone's feedback. Are there any suggestions for individuals who are building up patient advocacy programs from a startup company? That's a heavy lift. Anyone want to weigh in?
Good luck. I don't know if Daniel or Paul want to weigh in first. I have a lot of things I want to say. So
sure. I mean, my recommendation was talk to Michelle. Because that's basically what you have been doing for the past couple of years, Michelle, if I understand correctly. But I mean, another thing would be I think there's no need to recreate the wheel, and I think there are plenty of other industry professionals who's gone through this exact experience numerous times. And I think everyone in patient advocacy at some point has gone through, this phase. So I would encourage you to, reach out to Michelle, reach out to, Gene Campbell at PPALS and ask for introduction. And I think that's probably the best way to go. And I do want to say that, starting a patient advocacy function, I've helped many startup companies, start advocacy functions. But sometimes you have to start small. I think you have to start from, in startup settings, I think not all companies are ready to have full-time advocacy person. So whether it's a person wearing, comms and advocacy hat together, two hats, or it can be, I've seen companies that do it effectively with a medical science liaison who, partially contribute to patient advocacy. And, in terms of diversity, I think there's a route there, and, finding somebody who has diverse background who happen to be in that role, maybe they would be interested. I don't know. But my number one recommendation would be to talk to your peers.
Daniel, do you have anything, just to consider for a startup company and wanting to building up an advocacy program?
I agree with Paul in utilizing this network that we're currently all part of with PPALS as an opportunity to share ideas. But I will say, for words of encouragement, you really, when you're starting an advocacy group and you're very small, there's an even better opportunity to create a foundation of diversity and inclusion and representation more than ever, because you're not having to deal with systemic issues that might already be in place. So if there's anything that you can take from this, that there's an encouraging word that you can really set the bar, create that foundation within your team. And because for larger teams, it can be a little bit more difficult to kind of backtrack and try to get to an area that you would like to see yourself in when it relates to D&I. So that's all I can say with regards to that. So, but Michelle's your go-to person since that's her experience.
I have started the function at three startups, and the thing that I will always say, and this is partly my consulting background, but I also really enjoy Venn diagrams. So I always say to do landscape analyses. So you do the internal landscape analysis to understand the needs internally, the corporate goals, look at your patient community to understand their needs, and then like where those overlap, that's where your function will work, all of that. But that also gives you an understanding of who are the players that you're working with, who can help you, and who could, if you're looking at building your team and you need to build it really quickly, or if you need like contractors that you can pull in to help you a few hours a week or whatever it might be, that also helps you get a lay of the land in terms of who is out there and sort of like what your community looks like both internally and externally. But you can also reach out to me if we're connected. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn and send me a message.
Awesome. Thank you. That's the great thing about PPALS. It's really a community of advocacy leaders and experienced people from all vast, diverse perspectives of career that have led them to advocacy, and a great resource. If you're anyone on the call that's interested in advocacy, that's in advocacy, and may have a question or something that they need help with for a solution, this is definitely a great wealth of information. I will now pass it over to Rob, who have to the next part of our webinar. But I cannot thank enough my peers, my friends, my colleagues. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Daniel, for this very much needed conversation. And what a way to wrap up the year of 2021. Thank you. Now over to Rob.
All right, thank you, Veronica. I'd just like to thank everyone for attending the first part of this webinar. Part 2, Health Equity DEI Strategy from a Patient Advocacy Lens, will be occurring in late December or late January. We're still working on the specific dates. I'd like to thank the panelists personally for taking time out of your days to come and share with the PPALS community. And I would also like to announce, I don't know if it's been officially announced yet, but the 5th annual Patient Advocacy Certificate Training course, known as the PAC course, which occurs in Sioux Falls, is planned for May 16th through May 19th in 2022. We are going back to South Dakota. We are going back to see the bison. And we do that, of course, in conjunction with Sanford Research, who are great hosts and have really been supportive of PPALS and what it does. And keep your eyes open for details for that. There should be some information on the PPALS website. And have a great holiday season. And again, thanks everybody for attending and participating.